Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with a Monday Night Football preview between the Packers and the Raiders. Gonna go through DFS and props for tonight to make sure you're ready for this single game matchup to go out there and have yourself a night. So over there on the DFS side, more so gonna talk about the game theory side of things and how you should attack some of the larger field contests. And then over there for props, we'll go over a slip that I'm entering both over there on Underdog and on Prize Picks for tonight's action. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start it off with a look at the DFS slate. The main thing we should focus on here is some of the recent news that we've done. So most importantly, Aaron Jones unlikely to play tonight. I heard a few reports say that he's actually out as of right now, and that is going to have a huge impact on some of the ownership numbers, and most notably with AJ Dillon, who's down here at just $4,600, way too cheap for the kind of role that he's going to have. You can see I have him projected for 15.9 fantasy points, which is nearly 4x points per dollar. So you're talking about a player that is essentially, his median performance is a near ceiling. And then if he goes out there, scores a touchdown or two, could end up being the optimal captain. And that is, of course, reflected with the ownership, right? Everyone and anyone is going to be playing AJ Dillon tonight, and it's more so about how you're going to navigate the rest of your lineup if you're using an AJ Dillon than whether you should play him or fade him, right? I mean, anytime you have a player that's like nearly 4x points per dollar, down here in the 4K range, it's pretty hard to avoid him. I mean, for comparison's sake, right, projects twice as well as the Packers defense, twice as well as the Raiders defense. Even these kickers are about half the efficiency as somebody like an AJ Dillon. So if you're playing in a cash contest, smaller field GBP, maybe a single entry kind of contest, I don't know if you have to fade an AJ Dillon there, but in large field GBPs, there's going to be a huge argument for doing so. So just wanted to start there, point out the obvious piece of value, but outside of that, a ton of ownership going to the Raiders top two as well. So we have Davante Adams, Josh Jacobs as number 1 and 2 in the pricing, which makes sense given, their ceiling, right? The fact that they are perennial all-pro kind of players. But the unfortunate part is that they're on the same team, right? And both of them are about 75% owned. Whereas over here on the Packers, especially now that Aaron Jones is hurt, everyone is super cheap. I mean, $9,800 for Jordan Love. Dobbs, Watson are there at the top end of the 7K range, lower end of the 8s. And Watson even cheaper than Dobbs, which I think is pretty eye-opening. Then these middle-tier players like a Musgrave, Jaden Reed. I mean, even some of the value options like a DeGuara, a Torrey down there, Dontavian Wicks that it will see snaps out there for the Packers are all super cheap and affordable. So I understand why we have so much chalk on the Raiders. I also understand why they're so expensive, right there at $10,000 plus, but there's a huge argument to be made that the Packers side in general is just a lot better in terms of value, right? You're getting more bang for your buck on that side, and even if they don't go out there and post the most fantasy points, when you get somebody that's way too cheap, I mean, there's nearly a $4,000 price difference, right, between the number 1 wide receiver on one team in Davante Adams and the number 1 wide receiver in the Packers, right down here at $7,800. Watson doesn't have to do nearly as much to get there as somebody like Davante Adams. So for me personally tonight, the ownership is, siding towards the Raiders. I'm going more contrarian, right? I think that the Packers stacks, 4-2 Packer stacks, maybe even a 5-1 Packer stack or two might be worth a few looks, right? Going to be extremely underowned. So not only do I think that the Raiders 4-2 stacks are going to be extremely popular tonight, but I also think you're going to see a lot of 3-3s where you're taking one or maybe even both of these top 2 Raiders players. And a good way to get different is going to be to leave some salary on the table, as most showdown slates will be, but also just to take more of the Packers players, right? To be a little bit more balanced about your lineup construction to where you're not leaving like 5K on the table to be different, but more so just taking, the less popular script, right? Taking 2 or 3 of those wide receivers on the Packers and just hope that you get the right combination. So that's how I'm attacking this slate. You can see some of the ownership numbers over here on the right. Of course, guys, everything that's blacked out on here is posted over there on the Patreon. So if you want to know who I'm playing at captain, who I'm playing at flex for the entire pool, well, check it out over there on the Patreon. We have some of the scripts notes on there, so how I'm using every player in my pool. Some of the notes over here too. So I put, whether they're a core play for me. Also talk about, some of the different important factoids with certain players. So like for example, a guy is benefited by one script or the other, or ownership on this guy I think is too high or too low, for example. There are a bunch of different things that I throw over here in the player notes tab to make sure that you know exactly what I'm thinking for tonight's slate, right? So many of the tout sites out there, so many resources that you may have for Showdown will just give you ownership projections, right? It'll give you player projections. Maybe they'll even give you a player pool, but that's usually about all that you get from them, right? You don't get a lot of the strategy, how to go out there and actually put together lineups, some of the more contrarian builds to go with, and that's the idea with my Patreon, right? Is to not only give you the data to work with, which I'm using for my lineups, but also to give you some of the insight into how to actually put them together. So if you're looking for all the details on every player, check that out. But a few things we want to touch on here. So first off, in terms of captains, these top two players are about 20% owned apiece. So if you're looking to get different to the field, right, I probably wouldn't take a Davante Adams or Josh Jacobs at captain. You could also throw in the price tag dilemma, right? Both are extremely expensive at captain, and it just draws me more to these mid-tier captains, right? Whether it's a quarterback, I actually think a quarterback at captain is a little bit more intriguing for me on this slate than most. These mid-tier wide receivers, right? Packers wide receivers, I already told you, I'm going to be well over the field on, and that includes at the captain spot. But a Jacoby Myers, maybe it's a game where he can get to 20 fantasy points. That could very well be an optimal captain. Musgrave, Reed, I mean, you could throw A.J. Dillon in at captain too. I've only got him at 12% right now, which at flex, right, 53% ownership is mega chalk for this range. But at 12% ownership, he's less popular than Adams and Jacobs at captain, right? So I think if you're going to use A.J. Dillon in a large field GPP, you might just want to throw him in at captain, right? Take that 12% ownership number, maybe run with a more of a Packers heavy script because you are taking a rushing option for that team. And that might be a way to be slightly more different using A.J. Dillon, but let's remember, right? He's still 12% owned at captain, right? He's still higher owned than a Watson. He's twice the ownership of a Jacoby Myers at the captain slot. So let's not pretend that we're being contrarian by doing that, but I think it's a little bit better than eating that 53% at flex, especially considering if you're adding A.J. Dillon, right, he's pretty cheap, right? He's $4,600. You're probably taking one of these guys a captain, right? If you're using that kind of lineup. So not only do you have a 20% owned captain there, but you're adding in a value option, right? A spot that's normally pretty contrarian, right? Normally like 15 to 20% owned, that you're taking at 54% at flex. I mean, it's just... That's why in large field GPPs, if you're going to use A.J. Dillon tonight, which I will be in a few lineups, right? Just for full transparency, he will be in my player pool, both at flex and at captain tonight. It's just that when you use A.J. Dillon, you better be damn careful about duplicating yourself. You better be extra, you better be paying extra attention to that leverage. That's all I'll say there. In terms of other values that I think really are intriguing here, the kickers, especially when you have two inefficient offenses, right? I don't think either one's atrocious, right? They're not Steelers level bad when it comes to their efficiency, but they're also not top tier offenses, right? I like kickers in those sort of games. A lot of times you'll see those kind of teams stall out in the red zone. On top of that, I think you could take a look at Wicks for a little bit of value. He projects as the best points per dollar value on the entire slate. You have decent value out of Michael Mayer. Unfortunately, hasn't seen much action to this point, so I'd probably prefer Wicks even with Watson back. And then Emmanuel Wilson on Patrick Taylor. I believe Patrick Taylor's the one that I'd prefer tonight, but see which one of these running backs is active, right? Without Aaron Jones, you're going to see one of them suit up as the backup running back, and while they're not likely to get a ton of touches, right, maybe 4 to 5 in that backup role, they're only $200, right? And of course, if A.J. Dillon were to get injured, which we know, we don't want to wish that on anyone, but it happens all the time, right? Then somebody like Taylor could get 15, 20 touches, and at this price tag would almost automatically get there. So pretty much no matter what ownership number, I think it's Taylor tonight that I think is probably going to be active. Whatever ownership number he gets to, right? Let's say it's like maybe 1-2% ownership, it's probably worth getting over the field on that, right? And just as unfortunate as it is, A.J. Dillon probably has a 10% plus chance of getting injured tonight, right? That's just life as a running back in the NFL, right? You go down quite a bit, even if it's not a severe injury, right? You go out for the game quite a bit, return the next week. That's how Patrick Taylor gets there, right? And if he's 2% owned, I can tell you right now, he's got more than a 2% chance of getting there. A few other guys to point out, DeAndre Carter for the Raiders, really good after the catchability. So the fact that he's $200 actually makes me potentially want to get to him if he's going to be active. Then all their backup running backs for the Raiders, like I just don't have a good beat on, right? They have a few guys like Jakob Johnson. I know he's more of like the tight end, should say fullback kind of build, but he doesn't play all that often. Zamir White, right? He sees a few touches from game to game. It's just like, it feels like it's the Josh Jacobs show, right? If you're going to talk about the Raiders rushing attack. All right, and now for some prop analysis. So it'll be the same slip over on the two sites. So we'll go ahead, just go through it real quickly. It's Musgrave under receiving yards, and it's Mayer under receiving yards. So Mayer's at 7.5 receiving yards, both over there on Prize Picks and on Underdog. He's juiced -135 towards the under on Draftkings. He's not even on the board on FanDuel, and to this point of the year, I believe has 1 catch for 2 yards. So doesn't have a huge track record of getting a bunch of attention, a bunch of targets out there for the Raiders, and he could certainly get that 1 catch for 8 to 10 yards. I mean, that is perfectly possible, but when you're looking at the numbers, the track record to this point, and of course the sportsbook odds, which tell an entire story of themselves, I'd say that a lot of the value is on the under here. So I took that. I know it looks like a low projection. It's tough to fade some of those guys, but if you're looking at the sportsbook odds, if you're looking at the game logs to this point, there's a reason why he's so heavily juiced towards the under. And then with Musgrave under 32.5 yards, he was juiced -140 a little bit ago on DraftKings, I believe just before going live here. That did go down to -130, but still heavily juiced in our direction. And I think the thought process here is that it's going to be a close competitive game. We know the Raiders are likely going to try and run the ball against the Packers, which have been atrocious against the run to this point of the year, even against some shoddy rushing offenses, right? Have given up a bunch of yardage. And with Josh Jacobs in a pretty competent offensive line, right, you'd have to think that they're going to exploit that. A lot of the lines in this game are lower than they probably should be, I think because of that game script, right? Because they know that the Raiders are going to try and pound the football. And on the opposite side of things, it's not like it's a completely pass-heavy kind of offense, right? Jordan Love brings rushing upside himself. They've got A.J. Dillon. They'll probably feed the ball for like 15, maybe even 20 rushes tonight if they get ahead. So Musgrave at 32.5 receiving yards, again, not a super high projection, right? You don't always feel great about taking an under, but he's -130 for a reason, right? He was -140 a little bit ago for a reason. So I like the value there. The matchup with some of the linebackers and safeties on the Raiders, I would say is average, right? I don't think it's plus or super negative for this kind of matchup. So more so just trusting the books out there and knowing that 32.5 receiving yards doesn't seem like all that much, but for a tight end, right, especially one that's not a Travis Kelce sort of tier, it's asking quite a bit, right, for somebody to get to that, 35 to 40 yard mark. So definitely fading them here for this matchup and hoping that both these tight ends can stay quiet on the stat sheet tonight. And like I was mentioning before, you can go over to Prize Picks and take these same projections. For me, I have lower limits over there. I don't play as much over there on Prize Picks, so that's why we decided to focus on the Underdog site for that. But if you're a Prize Picks player, you have the same sort of opportunity over there, and hopefully we can make it a 3-for-3 sweep again. If you guys saw the video for the main slate yesterday, we of course went out there, went 3-for-3 on Underdog, 3-for-3 on Prize Picks, and all of our stacks for DFS went out there and just went off yesterday. So let's keep that momentum going. Let's go out there, cash out on these prop slips, and hopefully have ourselves a showdown slate as well. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the preview this week. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We'll have a Thursday night football preview coming out, also a main slate preview just like the last week, and hopefully we can keep that momentum rolling. We had quite the performance here over the weekend, both for golf and for football, and looking to add on to it here for this week's of action. So appreciate the support here, guys. Again, go ahead, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys next time for the next piece of content.